Today we will trace the footsteps of a people whose name is often buried in the margins of history books, yet whose cry still echoes through the mountains. They were a nomadic spirit that left its mark on the American Southwest. Theirs was a resistance not defined by conquest, but by survival. And their name, so often mispronounced, so often misunderstood, was Apache. But who were these people? Where did they come from and where did they go? How did they speak in their own tongue? Long before Geronimo, this people held a rich past whose beliefs, language, family structure, and origins offer us not just a story of a tribe, but a spiritual map of an entire continent. In this episode, we'll explore the origin theories of how the Apache arrived in the Americas, the language family they belong to, the mythological roots of their belief systems, the social balance within their clan structures, the differences between various Apache communities, and most importantly, the cultural essence, the spiritual resonance that belongs solely to them. If you're ready, we won't chase the dust of a forgotten war, but instead, we'll follow the living traces of a surviving identity. Because this is not just the story of a people. This is the resistance of a nomadic spirit the world tried to forget. Professor, what do we know about the origins of the Apache people? Where and when might these communities have arrived in the Americas?
According to the strongest theories we have, the Apache were part of the later migratory waves into North America. When we combine genetic, linguistic, and archaeological evidence, it becomes clear that the Apache are descendants of a group that migrated south from what is now Alaska and Canada around 1,000 to 1,500 years ago. They belong to the Athabaskan language family, a linguistic lineage still spoken today across a vast area stretching from Western Canada to the interior of Alaska. The Bering Strait theory suggests that the first humans entered the Americas from Asia via a land bridge some 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. However, the Apache weren't part of that initial wave. They came much later as part of the late migrants. Anthropologists believe that the Athabaskan peoples gradually moved southward from Alaska, reaching the American Southwest, what we now call New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas, between roughly 800 and 1400 AD. It was a multi-generational journey through mountains, forests, and arid plains. This long migration deeply shaped both their linguistic structures and cultural codes. The direct ancestors of the Apache first settled along the North Pacific coast, then spread into the western forests of Canada, and eventually made their way into the southwestern deserts of the United States. Along the way, their relationship with nature transformed. As they moved from forested regions to semi-arid zones, they developed new survival strategies. This was not just a physical adaptation, it was a cultural metamorphosis, and it was during this transformation that the Apache identity began to form. According to one legend, their ancestors were sent from the icy northern mountains by the Creator. The divine command was, "Go, but learn every direction." The Apache interpreted this story as a sacred metaphor for their geographic journey. The four directions, north, south, east, and west, were not just points on a compass. They symbolized the stages of life itself, from birth to death. For the Apache, the journey was not merely a physical trek, it was a spiritual purification. Some anthropologists draw parallels between the Apache migration and ancient forms of Asian shamanism. Their trance-based rituals, respectful hunting practices, and dualistic spiritual frameworks all bear striking similarities to ancient Siberian cultures. This suggests that the Bering migration carried not just physical bodies, but cultural memories as well. In conclusion, while the Apache are certainly Native Americans, they are not among the continent's most ancient inhabitants. They represent a spirit of movement, migratory yet rooted, settled yet never forgetting the journey. Their identity has always been shaped by geography, and this is why throughout history, they've remained in motion, both physically and spiritually.
Professor, to which language family does the Apache language specifically belong? And does this structure show similarities with other Native American languages?
The Apache language belongs to the Athabaskan, also known as Na-Dené language family. This family spans a vast area from Alaska through Western Canada down into the American Southwest. What's fascinating is that despite the immense distances, the core linguistic structures remain related. In other words, the Apache spoken today in the deserts of New Mexico shares its roots with the Dene languages spoken thousands of kilometers to the north. In Apache languages, verbs are the core. A single verb doesn't just mean to go or to come, it can also convey when, in which direction, in what mood, for whom, and with whom the action occurs. One verb form often carries the entire meaning of a sentence. In this structure, the verb is not just an action, it embodies the spirit of the event. For comparison, Navajo, Apache's closest linguistic relative, provides us with a clear reference. Since both groups are part of the Athabaskan system, they share a great deal of grammatical structure. Some dialects are so similar that elder Navajo speakers can understand Apache to some degree, up to 50%. This is especially evident in sacred ceremonies, where idioms and symbolic expressions often overlap. One of the most distinctive features of Apache is its use of tone to alter meaning. A change in pitch can change the entire word's meaning. This does not exist in Turkish. However, Apache is also an agglutinative language, meaning it forms meaning by attaching many suffixes to a root verb, much like in Turkish. However, there's an important distinction to make here. Turkish uses a linear suffix system, where tense and subject are clearly marked in a sequence. Apache, on the other hand, employs a far more complex, layered system. Some of its grammatical markers even appear before the verb, and elements like emotional state, direction, and social context are embedded directly into the verb. In summary, yes, there is a superficial structural similarity between Apache and Turkish, particularly in their use of agglutinative verbs. But in terms of function, depth, and the way meaning is constructed, there are significant differences. We plan to explore these similarities and differences in greater detail in a separate episode focused entirely on linguistic comparison.
When was the nature of the Apache belief system? In terms of mythology, which spiritual traditions did it resemble or differ from?
The Apache belief system was animistic at its core, deeply rooted in nature, and built around interpreting life through sacred directions. For them, the world was not merely a material plane of existence. It was also a realm of spirits, unseen entities, and sacred energies. Mountains, rivers, winds, animals, everything had a soul and a purpose. Respect toward these spirits was seen not just as a religious duty, but a moral one. At the center of their spirituality lay the concept of the four sacred directions: north, south, east, and west. Each direction was associated with a sacred color, an animal, and a stage of life. For instance, the east symbolized birth and new beginnings, while the west represented death and closure. These directions weren't just geographical, they were spiritual coordinates. Even the orientation of a person during a ceremony, or the direction of a ritual dance, followed strict symbolic guidelines. Rather than worshiping gods in a traditional sense, the Apache connected with nature spirits and ancestral souls. In this regard, their belief system shares certain similarities with neighboring peoples like the Hopi and the Pueblo. However, there's a clear distinction. The Apache worldview was more inward, individual-centered, and heavily influenced by shamanic practices. For example, while the Hopi might perform collective rituals in large temple spaces, Apache ceremonies often took place in smaller groups, sometimes led by a single shaman. Shamans, spiritual guides, were central figures in Apache religion. They didn't just heal illness, they also maintained the spiritual balance of the community. Yet becoming a shaman wasn't a matter of study, it was a matter of vision. One would usually have to undergo a transformative experience, a severe illness, a vivid dream, or a supernatural event to be recognized as a shaman. Such an experience was seen as a sign that the person had crossed the threshold into the spirit world. In Apache mythology, animals were far more than just physical beings. Creatures like the eagle, the bear, and the snake were considered sacred figures, believed to carry insights into one's personality or destiny. The eagle, in particular, was regarded as the sky's watchman and played a central role in many ceremonies. Seeing a specific animal in a dream could be interpreted as an omen or a spiritual message. Among the cultures with the closest parallels are the Navajo. They share several divine figures in mythological narratives with the Apache. However, the Apache tradition is less openly discussed, more inwardly experienced, and focused on personal rituals rather than public displays. In this way, it stands apart not only among Native American religions, but within global spiritual systems as well. In conclusion, the Apache spiritual worldview is a profound and symbolic system, one that sees nature as teacher, animals as guides, and the four directions as a spiritual compass. Without understanding this, it is impossible to truly grasp the cultural essence of the Apache people.
Not just
Professor,
a family,
what was the
but a
family
lineage,
structure of the Apache
a
people
spirit,
like? In terms of
a name
clans,
carried in the
lineage,
wind.
and marriage systems.
Not just a family,
What principles did they
but a
prioritize?
lineage.
While the
spirit,
Apache are often stereotyped
name
from the
carried in
outside
the
to the
wind.
image of the warrior male, their internal social organization was in fact highly structured and deeply balanced. The core unit of their society was not the extended family, but the clan. Clans were groups of individuals who believed they shared a common ancestor and upheld the same symbolic traditions and ritual practices. Every individual was born into a clan, and that clan became a central part of their identity. Among the Apache, lineage was generally traced through the mother. This matrilineal system meant that individuals belonged to their mother's clan. When a man married, he would move in with his wife's family, and their children would be considered members of the mother's clan. While men took on prominent warrior roles, women were the keepers of memory, the transmitters of tradition, and influential figures in decision-making processes. Within their marriage system, marrying within one's own clan was strictly forbidden. This was not only a social rule, but a mythological taboo. A young Apache could only marry someone from a different clan. This practice helped to ensure both genetic diversity and social harmony within the tribe. Marriages were usually arranged with the consent of the families and were sanctified through special ceremonial rituals. During these marriage ceremonies, symbolic gifts were offered to the bride's family, not as payment or barter, but as a spiritual gesture of union. In some cases, shamans would participate in the ceremony, offering prayers to nature. The harmony of the couple was seen not only in terms of social compatibility, but also as a form of spiritual alignment. In Apache belief, a family was not merely the joining of two people, it was the spiritual bonding of two clans. In child-rearing, there was a careful balance between male and female roles. Fathers taught their children survival skills, how to hunt, track, and defend. These lessons began at a young age. Mothers, on the other hand, passed down ritual knowledge, traditional wisdom, medicinal plant lore, and oral stories. In this way, every child grew up equipped both physically and spiritually. One especially noteworthy aspect is how Apache children were seen as individuals within the community. Discipline was not imposed through fear or force, but through modeling behavior. From an early age, children were taught about the spiritual responsibilities of their clan. They weren't merely raised as individuals, but as bearers of a story, guardians of a collective legacy. In summary, the Apache family structure was a clan-based, matrilineal, exogamous system woven together with both social and spiritual responsibilities. This structure provided a resilient and cohesive foundation for surviving the harsh realities of nomadic life.
Professor, what were the sociocultural differences among the various Apache groups, such as the Mescalero, Chiricahua, and Jicarilla? Can we really speak of a single, unified Apache identity?
This question is critical to understanding the historical identity of the Apache. Although the word Apache today seems to refer to a single people, in reality it encompasses multiple distinct groups, each with its own characteristics. While these groups do share certain linguistic and cultural traits, they also have significant differences in lifestyle, belief systems, and ritual practices. So in essence, Apache is an umbrella term under which several localized and often independently developed identities exist. One of the most known groups is the Chiricahua Apache. This group is especially renowned for its warrior ethos. Geronimo, for instance, belonged to the Chiricahua. They lived in mountainous regions and developed extraordinary skill in guerrilla-style defense tactics. For the Chiricahua, nature was not just a habitat, it was a weapon, a refuge, and a guide. Their belief system tended to be more closed, shamanic, and relatively insulated from outside influence. The Mescalero Apache, on the other hand, lived closer to central settlements, often in vast grasslands, and were more involved in livestock herding. Their religious rituals were more outward-facing and collective in nature. Ceremonial dances performed by Mescalero women are among the oldest ritual traditions still preserved today. In this group, while male shamans were common, special spiritual roles were also assigned to women. The Jicarilla Apache lived in the northeastern region of present-day New Mexico, neighboring Pueblo communities. This geographic proximity left a visible imprint on their culture. In Jicarilla ceremonies, Pueblo motifs, earth rituals, and the Four Directions teachings are more prominent. They adapted somewhat to agricultural practices and even left evidence of semi-permanent settlements. At certain periods, they adopted pottery making and weaving, activities more typical of sedentary cultures. The Lipan Apache lived around Texas and were heavily influenced by contact with Mexico. Though they spoke Athabaskan languages, their vocabulary shows noticeable traces of Spanish influence. This group came under the influence of Christian missionaries more than others, and lost some of their traditional customs, yet they still managed to preserve their identity of resistance. These cultural differences were shaped not only by geography, but also by variations in social and religious organization. Some groups had male-dominated leadership systems, while others gave women more societal authority. In some, shamanic rituals were conducted in secret, while in others, ceremonies were public and involved the whole community. Despite these differences, all these groups came together under the shared identity of Apache in times of external threat. In such moments, they acted through a common language, a shared memory, and a collective history. But in everyday life, in their rituals and social structures, each group maintained its own unique voice and rhythm. In conclusion, to say Apache is to speak of many small universes under one name. They may have all gazed at the same stars, but each grew in its own mountain, in its own silence.
In your opinion, how did Apache culture differ from other indigenous peoples of North America? Was there a unique spiritual or cultural essence that set them apart?
Apache culture shared many foundational elements with other Native American traditions, living in harmony with nature, belief systems centered around the sacred directions, and clan-based social structures. But in key aspects, it diverged noticeably. These differences weren't merely matters of lifestyle. They reflected a fundamentally distinct worldview. First and foremost, the Apache were true nomadic warriors. This set them apart from sedentary or semi-sedentary tribes. For instance, the Navajo gradually turned toward agriculture, and the Pueblo peoples established permanent settlements. But the Apache embraced movement itself as a way of life. For them, place was sacred, but not in terms of attachment. What mattered was understanding the spirit of a place. Constant movement was seen not only as a survival strategy, but also as a form of physical and spiritual purification. The second major distinction was the sanctification of the individual. While many indigenous cultures emphasized collective identity, the Apache placed personal integrity, individual decision-making, and freedom at the center of their social philosophy. This was evident even in their leadership structure. An Apache war chief didn't issue orders, he offered guidance. Leadership was earned, not imposed, and had to be accepted by the people. This individual-centered model even applied during wartime. Each warrior made his own decisions, without pressure from collective authority. Here, freedom was not just a political ideal, it was a spiritual value. The third difference lay in their mythological silence. While some native cultures expressed their myths through epic storytelling and public rituals, the Apache practiced a quieter mythology. Their sacred stories weren't told freely or often. They required the right time, the right person, and the right spiritual state. From the outside, this can make their mythological tradition appear sparse, but in truth, it is deeper, more symbolic, and more private. Sacred knowledge wasn't meant for display, it was preserved for spiritual transformation. The fourth key difference was the concept of non-surrender. Many indigenous peoples resisted colonization, of course, but for the Apache, surrender was not just a physical defeat, it was the death of the soul. Geronimo's final words before surrender perfectly crystallized this mindset. I was born free, and I will die free. This belief in the sanctity of freedom lies at the heart of Apache identity. Lastly, we must acknowledge that Apache culture was the product of survival intelligence shaped by a harsh landscape and constant threat. Reducing them to the label of warriors misses the point. They were not simply a people who fought, they were a people who walked with honor. In every mountain shadow, in every silent night march, they carried an identity aligned with the spirit of the land. This identity is an essence, unseen, undescribable, but deeply felt. They may have looked at the same stars as other peoples, but the meaning they gave those stars was entirely their own. And it is this difference that makes them unique.
They were more than a people. The Apache were a belief, walking in the shadow of silent mountains, a culture that prayed while tracking footprints in the dust. They belonged to no army, no state. Only the wind and the mountains commanded their loyalty. Their identity was shaped by the rhythm of the land beneath their feet, and every step they took carried the imprint of an unseen spirit. That's why history remembers them not just as a tribe, but as a way of standing, an unyielding stance. They were called a legend, but in truth, they were a resistance we never really forgot. But what did these people believe in? How did they call upon their gods? And why was nature not just a place to live, but a being that spoke? In the next episode, we open the door to Apache mythology. From shamans who spoke with the spirits of the mountains to sacred rituals guided by the 4 cardinal directions, we will enter the unseen world of the Apache people. Stay with us, because this journey leads not only into the past, but deep into the soul of humanity itself.
This is not mythology. This is a living bond.
Every society has its gods, but some peoples saw nature itself as divine. Welcome to Apache mythology. Professor, what kind of cosmic understanding lies at the heart of Apache mythology? How did they define the world, and how did they perceive sacred order?
In Apache mythology, the universe is not seen as something created for humans, but as a living, breathing totality that includes humans without being owned by them. The world is not a domain made by the gods. It is already alive, already sacred, already inhabited by spirits. For the Apache, there is no real divide between the natural and the supernatural, between what is seen and what is unseen. The human being is not the center, but a participant in a delicate balance. One must know their place and their limits. They divide the cosmos into 4 essential layers: the underworld, the earth, the sky, and the spiritual environment that surrounds all. The underworld is the realm to which spirits may go after death, a place of darkness, but not in the sense of evil. Darkness here means transformation and introspection. The earth is where humans live, but it is also a place where spirits move and signs appear. The sky is the domain of ancestral souls and animals who watch from above. Stars are not gods, but beings that carry divine wisdom. At the center of everything lies the concept of the 4 sacred directions: east, west, north, and south. Each direction is linked to a season, a color, an animal, a life stage, and a spirit. These directions do not simply guide movement, they are honored as sacred presences. Every ceremony begins by facing the east, because the east is where the sun rises, and thus where life begins. In a child's initiation ceremony, they are danced through the directions, a symbolic introduction to the cosmic balance of the world. The Apache concept of God is not expressed through a single absolute figure. Instead, nature itself is sacred. Mountains carry spirits. The wind speaks. Animals deliver signs. And crucially, the universe does not revolve around humans. That distinction is essential. Humans are not placed here to rule nature, but to live with it, to learn from it. In this worldview, the universe is not fixed. It is a balance in constant motion. Everything moves: time, wind, water, even thought. That's why, for the Apache, what is sacred is not permanence, but harmony. Spiritual maturity comes not from resisting nature, but from flowing with it. Shamans speak based on the direction of the wind. They make choices by watching the animals. Because the universe speaks if you know its language. In conclusion, in Apache mythology, the universe is not a place with boundaries. It is a living, breathing, moving partnership. In this cosmos, humans are not masters of nature, but coexisting beings who carry responsibility. What is sacred is not some invisible sky god, but the earth beneath your feet, and the silence you can still hear if you're listening.
Why were the 4 directions considered so sacred in Apache belief? What cultural and ritual meanings did they carry?
In Apache mythology, the 4 directions are not merely geographic markers, they are sacred forces that represent the fundamental structure of the universe. Each direction corresponds to a season, a color, an emotional state, a life stage, and an animal. Together they form the sacred balance of existence. Without understanding this framework, it is nearly impossible to fully grasp Apache ceremonies, prayers, or even daily life. The east is seen as the direction of beginnings. It is where the sun rises, where each new day and each new life begins. That's why every ceremony begins by facing east. Its associated color is often yellow, echoing the warm tones of the first light. The east represents youth, hope, and birth. Among animals, it is linked to the eagle or hawk, as they are the first to greet the rising sun. The west is not the direction of death, but of completion. As the sun sets, the body tires and the spirit turns inward. In Apache myth, the west is symbolized by the color red or purple and associated with the life stage of old age and wisdom. Spirits begin their journey by turning westward. During rituals, shamans often bow to the west as the wind from that direction carries the whispers of the ancestors. The north represents cold, silence, and testing. In Apache belief, the north is the place where one is forced to confront the self, where the wind doesn't chill the body but shakes the soul. It is symbolized by white, and turning north during a ceremony represents a willingness to face hardship. It is associated with the bear, a creature that hibernates and embodies introspection and survival. The south is the direction of warmth, compassion, and harmony. The southern wind is neither harsh nor silencing. It restores balance. Its associated color is usually green or blue, symbolizing childhood, innocence, and renewal. The deer or turtle are linked to the south, as they represent gentleness, peace, and patience. When brought together, these directions form not just a compass, but a spiritual map. Every person's life is believed to pass through each of the directions. They are born in the east, grow in the south, die in the west, and reflect in the north. This cycle applies not only to the individual, but to the universe itself. Seasons, emotions, and even thoughts rotate within this circle. In Apache rituals, the 4 directions are constantly honored. Dances rotate through all directions, prayers are spoken to each direction in turn. In sacred ceremonies, standing in the center of a ceremonial circle means standing at the center of the universe, in perfect spiritual alignment. In the end, the belief in the 4 directions is not merely a ritual element of Apache culture. It is a cosmic worldview. It is the key to understanding the bond between nature and spirit. Because in the Apache universe, if you don't know the directions, you are spiritually lost.
What role did animals play in Apache mythology? What were the symbolic meanings of figures like the eagle, the bear, and the snake?
In Apache mythology, animals were not simply parts of nature. They were teachers, messengers, and spiritual guides. Each animal was believed to possess a unique spirit capable of communicating directly with humans. Encountering an animal, hearing its call, or seeing it in a dream was never seen as ordinary. It was interpreted as a sign. For the Apache, animals spoke the invisible language of the natural world. The eagle was the most sacred of all. It flew closest to the heavens and was the only creature believed to face the sun directly. Its feathers were used in rituals, as they were thought to carry the shaman's prayers upward to the sky. The eagle is especially associated with the east, the direction of beginnings and light. If a warrior dreamed of an eagle before battle, it was seen as a sign of courage and victory. But the eagle also symbolized great responsibility. To carry its spirit meant not just power, but the burden of wisdom and duty. The bear represented introspection and protection. It was linked with the north, the direction of silence, cold, and inner trials. Because the bear hibernates, it was seen as a symbol of death and rebirth. A shaman with the bear's spirit was quiet but powerful. The bear attacks only when necessary, but otherwise chooses solitude. Being watched by the bear was believed to indicate that a person was undergoing an internal transformation. The snake, as in many cultures, had a dual meaning. On one hand, it was tied to the earth and the underworld, connected to death, mystery, and hidden knowledge. On the other, its shedding skin represented rebirth, change, and spiritual cleansing. In Apache rituals, the snake often appears during initiation ceremonies, especially during adolescence, symbolizing the transition from one identity to another. The deer was associated with the south, representing childhood, gentleness, and innocence. A person carrying the deer spirit was patient, observant, and in tune with harmony. The quiet way a deer walks through the forest was seen by the Apache as a lesson in spiritual awareness. Hunters would offer prayers to honor the spirit of a slain animal, acknowledging it not merely as a source of food, but as a gift from the universe. When someone encountered an animal during a dream or ritual, they were believed to carry that animal's spirit for life. This wasn't merely a personal totem as in modern interpretations. It was a deep spiritual bond. The animal became a kind of inner voice. In moments of anger, fear, or decision-making, the person would sense the guidance of that animal's presence. In conclusion, animals in Apache mythology were like hidden gods within nature. To meet one was not just a physical encounter, but the opening of a spiritual message.
Who were the shamans in Apache society, and how were they chosen? How did a person become someone who could speak with spirits?
In Apache culture, being a shaman is not a profession or social title, it is a spiritual obligation. A shaman is not viewed as an ordinary person, yet they are not considered divine either. Instead, they act as a bridge between the world of spirits and the physical world. But that bridge is not a path just anyone can walk. Becoming a shaman is not about being chosen by people, it is about being called. An Apache shaman is not appointed by the community. Rather, they are chosen by the spirits or nature itself. This calling often begins in childhood or adolescence, and it comes through unusual experiences. High fevers, extended periods of isolation, unexplainable dreams, or becoming lost in the wilderness and returning with a different awareness. From a modern perspective, these might be seen as traumas, but in Apache culture, they are signs of spiritual awakening. Repeated dreams, hearing voices, sensing communication with animals, these are the signs of a future shaman. When such signs appear, it is usually a current shaman or an elder woman who recognizes them. At that point, spiritual training begins. But this is not just the transfer of knowledge, it is an experiential initiation. The candidate is often left alone in nature for weeks or even months. They endure hunger, thirst, and isolation. The goal is not to suffer for its own sake, but to sharpen the sensitivity of the spirit through physical weakness. The apprentice doesn't learn to speak to animals, the wind, or the stones. They learn to hear that they are already speaking. Shamans are not divided by gender. Both men and women can serve a shaman. In fact, in some Apache communities, it is believed that women have stronger spiritual connections. Female shamans are often consulted during major life transitions, birth, illness, death, while male shamans tend to lead public ceremonies. However, this distinction is fluid. Shamanic power is based on spiritual ability, not physical identity. A shaman's duty goes beyond communicating with spirits.
They are also responsible for healing both physical and spiritual illnesses. By listening to plants, they hear which herb will help which person. When someone is out of spiritual balance, the shaman uses ceremonies and symbolic objects to bring them back to the right path. They may also guide the community through childbirth rituals or before going to war. Every action has a spiritual echo. Nothing is merely physical. In Apache belief, once a person becomes a shaman, it becomes a lifelong duty. To be a shaman is not just to carry knowledge, it is to carry a message from the spirit world and to deliver it at the right moment. This removes the individual from ordinary life, but also isolates them, because the language of spirits is not something easily shared among people. In the end, an Apache shaman is not born, appointed, or elected. They are the ones who answer the call of the spirit. And once they do, they can never again be just an ordinary person.
Why were dance, music, and rhythm so important in Apache rituals? Were they merely performances or spiritual tools for transformation?
In Apache rituals, dance, music, and rhythm were never viewed as performance, entertainment, or aesthetic activity. They were spiritual instruments, used to make contact with unseen forces, to align with the frequency of the universe, and to communicate with the spirit world. In some ceremonies, no words were spoken at all, only movement, sound, and rhythm were used. Because in Apache belief, the clearest connection with the spirits is made within the harmony of silence. Dance represents the alignment of the body with the spirit. Every movement is symbolic. A turn, a shift in direction, a leap, a gesture of kneeling, each one shaped by the purpose of the ritual. For example, during a young woman's puberty ceremony, the dance begins facing the east, as it is the direction where life begins. Movements are circular, because in the Apache world, nothing moves in straight lines. Everything turns, repeats, transforms. Rhythm is the spiritual form of time. The beat of the drum is not just heard, it syncs with the heartbeat. As the rhythm increases, the heart accelerates. As it slows, the body calms. This is why many participants fall into a trance state during rituals. Trance is not about losing consciousness, it is about surrendering to another voice within. Shamans guide this state using rhythm. In these fluctuations, the soul begins to cross over to the other side. Music is often based on imitating natural sounds, bird calls, wind currents, animal cries. But the goal is not to mimic nature's voice, it is to join it. The instruments used in Apache ceremonies are simple, yet powerful. Drums, rattles, bone flutes. Each one is tied to a specific spiritual entity or directional force. The dancer does not move for themselves alone, they move on behalf of the entire community. There is no solo dance in Apache rituals. Movements are performed either simultaneously or in coordinated succession. This shared motion brings the collective spirit into balance. Because in Apache belief, not only individuals can fall ill, entire communities can suffer spiritual imbalances. And such illness can only be healed through shared rhythm and collective motion. Some ceremonies are restricted to men, others to women. But especially in rites of passage, such as puberty, marriage, or death, the distinction dissolves. What guides the ritual is not the body, but the rhythm. In conclusion, in Apache ritual life, dance and music are not art forms. They are spiritual conduits, not a performance, but a passage, a way to awaken the spirit through the body's language. And that's why when you watch an Apache dance, you must not only look with your eyes, you must listen with your heart. Because that rhythm is not calling to your ears, it's calling to the oldest voice inside you.
How did Apache mythology differ from the belief systems of neighboring indigenous peoples? Was there a spiritual quality unique to them, something only they carried?
While Apache mythology shares surface-level similarities with many native belief systems across North America, it stands apart in significant ways, especially in its view of spirituality, the role of ritual, and the dynamic between individual, community, and nature. These differences reflect how their nomadic lifestyle shaped their spiritual language. To begin with, neighboring peoples such as the Navajo, Pueblo, and Zuni were mostly settled agrarian societies. Their religious structures were built around fixed temples, seasonal cycles, and stable rituals that maintained harmony with the land. In contrast, the Apache had no permanent temples. For them, sacredness was not tied to place, but to the moment. Each ritual was born anew, shaped by the spirit of the present. Another key distinction lies in the concept of deity. While many indigenous cultures had well-defined gods, sky gods, earth gods, creator gods, the Apache spiritual worldview had no structured pantheon. Instead of fixed deities, they believed in spiritual forces, mysterious, shifting energies that were always experienced personally, never universally. A shaman's vision, for example, was not transferable. One person's dream could not be interpreted by another. This individual mysticism is one of the clearest lines separating Apache belief from its neighbors. In Pueblo or Hopi rituals, ceremonies often served collective functions, maintaining agricultural cycles, honoring communal balance, blessing the harvest. In Apache practice, rituals were often more about personal transformation and spiritual renewal. While Pueblo rituals might involve large crowds, Apache ceremonies were often solitary or conducted with only a small, intimate group. This points to a more inward-facing spiritual structure. Another powerful difference lies in their relationship with silence. Many indigenous traditions emphasize spoken prayers or chants, but Apache shamans and spiritual guides often communicate through inner voice, whisper, or even pure movement. In Apache belief, the sacred is not declared aloud. It is felt. This created a culture where mystery and depth were preserved through quiet reverence rather than public expression. Lastly, while in many indigenous societies, spiritual authority followed social hierarchy, among the Apache, spiritual insight stood completely outside of social rank. If a woman, an elder, or even a child encountered spiritual power, they were granted authority, regardless of their position in the tribe. This reveals a worldview where spiritual legitimacy was earned through connection, not title. In conclusion, although Apache mythology may appear similar to other indigenous traditions on the surface, it is in fact more personal, quieter, less permanent, but also deeper. It is a belief system that writes the sacred not into stone, but into the wind. And perhaps that's why, even when forgotten, it is never erased. Because what was never written down can only survive by living inside us.
For the Apache, prayer was not spoken. It was carried by the wind. The Creator had no name because the divine was everywhere, in the eagle's wing and the silence of a stone, in the direction a fallen leaf chose to drift. For them, mythology wasn't something to be told, it was something to be lived. Spirit and body, nature and human flowed as one. And in that flow, the most sacred thing was the meaning found within silence. But who carried this ancient knowledge? Who led the ceremonies? Who bore the weight of the spirit? The answer was hidden in those who rarely spoke, in the women, the shamans, and the families. In the next episode, you'll meet the silent bearers of the spirit. Stay with us, because the memory of a people lives not only through its warriors, but through those who remember.
Sometimes spirits choose not the warriors, but the silent ones. History is often written with male heroes at its center, but in Apache legends, the deepest secrets are often found in the whispers of a mother. The soul of a people is not carried only on battlefields, but in the hearts of mothers, shamans, and grandmothers. Today, we will listen to the unseen carriers of Apache mythology, the women, the spiritual guides, and the silent memory keepers of the families. Professor, what role did women play in the spiritual life of Apache society?
In Apache culture, a woman was not simply a mother or a wife. She was seen as the bearer of the spirit, the quiet force at the heart of the community. From a Western perspective, Apache society may appear patriarchal on the surface, but when we look through the lens of myth and spirituality, a completely different reality unfolds. Because for the Apache, spiritual knowledge is preserved not through battle, but through continuity. and women are the primary agents of that continuity. A woman's spiritual role begins with birth. When an Apache child is born, the first to wash them, to touch them, to offer prayer is the mother. But this prayer is not spoken aloud. It is whispered or conveyed only through touch. According to belief, the newborn still remains tethered to the spirit world in those early moments. The mother's touch is not to call the soul to this world, but to show it that this world is also safe. That moment is not just tenderness, it is a ritual of spiritual passage. Women, living in harmony with the cycles of the moon, were believed to feel the rhythms of nature more deeply than anyone else. The timing of ceremonies, especially transitional rites, was often determined based on their observations. Women played essential roles during birth, illness, and death, the three moments when the visible and invisible worlds are closest. In Apache belief, women had the ability to hold that threshold space. Some women would speak of dreams in which they had communicated with animals or the wind. These experiences were never dismissed, quite the opposite. Such women would slowly become quietly consulted spiritual guides. They didn't lead ceremonies, but they could sense when the time was right, which child carried a unique bond, or which dream held danger. They were not called shamans or seers, because Apache language has no such titles. They were simply known as those who know, or those who feel. And that was enough. Even though their political authority in daily life seemed limited, spiritually they guided through silence. Even shamans would sometimes consult elder women before making a decision. Because in Apache belief, it is not words that guide, but intuition. And the deepest source of intuition is the female body and experience. In the end, within Apache spirituality, the woman is the one who feels the unseen, carries the unspoken, and holds the tribe together from within. Her power is quiet, unadorned, but profound. Because the truest home of the spirit is not built in noise, it is built in silence.
Professor, how did the Apache belief system reflect on family structure and childbearing practices?
In Apache society, the family was not merely a blood-bound unit. It was a spiritual trust, a space where responsibility for the soul was passed on. A child was not seen as the continuation of a bloodline, but as a new spirit joining the great cycle of the universe. Raising a child wasn't just care, it was the art of grounding a soul in the right way. Each child was foretold in dreams. Mothers or grandmothers would have specific visions weeks before birth, seeking clues about the soul the child would carry. If a snake appeared in the dream, it meant the child would carry transformation and intuition. If a deer appeared, the child would likely be peaceful and patient. These signs became the first guides for how the child would be raised. Children were watched over not just by parents, but by the entire community, not merely for physical safety, but for their spiritual state. In Apache belief, children remained partially connected to the spirit world. Their words, drawings, or even their silence could be messages. If a child repeatedly dreamed of animals, it was seen as a sign that they might carry a spiritual purpose in the future. Parents did not punish their children. In Apache cosmology, anger was viewed as a spiritual imbalance that could bruise the soul. Discipline was modeled through behavior and silence. A mother didn't explain right and wrong in long speeches. She embodied it. For instance, when a child made a mistake, she might not scold, but quietly retreat into nature. That act alone would teach the child about boundaries and about turning inward. Family roles were fluid, not rigid. Fathers could cook and care for children. Mothers might accompany a hunting trip. What mattered wasn't gender, but harmony and spiritual balance. Grandmothers in particular were not simply elders. They were keepers of memory. Myths, dreams, and stories of spiritual events were passed on through them. A child in Apache society was not just the future, but a bridge to the past. According to belief, some spirits are reborn. Elders would often observe newborns closely and say, "This baby walks like our uncle who died years ago." If multiple signs appeared, the child might be recognized as a returned soul and treated with special care and reverence. In essence, the Apache family was not a biological institution. It was the center of spiritual transitions and ancestral memory. Each child was a continuation of a myth, each family a guardian of a soul's journey. And in that journey, the most important act was learning to listen to the child's spirit.
How were female shamans recognized in Apache society, and what roles did they take on?
In Apache culture, becoming a shaman wasn't about a title, it was about a spiritual calling. And that calling made no distinction between male or female.
The world does not
However,
sit,
what set female shamans apart was how they heard the call, more quietly, more deeply, and often from the shadows rather than the center of the ritual. Perhaps because of this, the knowledge they carried lived longer and was forgotten less. Female shamans were usually recognized in childhood or adolescence through certain signs, recurring dreams, unusual connections with animals, or visions brought on by illness. For example, if a young girl repeatedly dreamed of the same image, a deer always facing east, or waking often to whispers, elder women would observe closely. These were not dismissed as coincidences. They were seen as signs of a strong link to the spirit world. They weren't called healers or seers, not because they didn't fulfill those roles, but because such titles were avoided. In Apache belief, spiritual roles are protected not by names, but by silence. Everyone might know who the shaman was, but no one would say it aloud. During ceremonies, they would sit among the people, intervening only when necessary. A woman leaning to whisper in a child's ear, or simply holding eye contact with an elder, could be considered a sacred act of guidance. Their roles differed from male shamans. While men often led pre-war ceremonies and communal rites, female shamans were called upon during birth, illness, and death, moments of spiritual transition. In birth, for example, their words didn't just ease pain, they opened the passage between worlds. They didn't assist birth, they opened the gates for the spirit to arrive. Female shamans were also known for their connection with plants. Their knowledge came not just from experience, but through dream and intuition. When preparing healing remedies, they would place their hands on the plant, close their eyes, and wait for the plant to speak. If the plant remained silent that day, no remedy was made, because nature was not ready. There was no formal initiation for a woman to be accepted as a shaman. If the spirits had chosen her, the community would quietly honor it. But these women never declared their power, never competed or displayed it. Apache belief says, a true shaman never calls herself one. She simply walks, and the wind follows her. In the end, a female shaman in Apache culture is not merely a healer or guide. She is the silent key to the spirit world's gate. She does not speak often, but when she does, her words echo in places no one else can reach.
How was spiritual knowledge passed down through generations in Apache culture? Without written records, how was this sacred heritage preserved?
In Apache belief, spiritual knowledge was not stored in books. It lived in a glance, in a silence, in a repeated gesture. For them, memory was not a text, but a living presence. This knowledge passed from generation to generation, not just through words, but through behavior, symbols, timing, and above all, through natural rhythm, not conscious teaching. From early childhood, every Apache was taught by observation. A child would witness the preparations for a ritual without explanation. Where a stone was placed, when the fire was lit, what was postponed because the wind shifted, these things were not spoken aloud. But by watching the same scenes over many seasons, the child would internalize the meaning. Spiritual knowledge wasn't preserved in speech. It was preserved through ritualized action. A grandmother wouldn't say, "This plant is sacred." She would quietly gather it and give it to a sick person. The child watched. Years later, if that same child reached for the same plant in a moment of need, the knowledge had successfully passed on. The Apache called this not learning, but remembering. A spiritual recall, not a mental acquisition. Some knowledge was passed only through dreams. Elder shamans would tell the youth, "One day you will dream of a mountain, an animal, or a direction." If the dream came, the shaman would meet with them not during the day and never in public, but at night in solitude. Because in Apache belief, spiritual truth is polluted by noise. Among women, this silent transmission was especially profound. After giving birth, a new mother would often stay in the same tent with an elder woman for days, saying very little. But by watching how she held the child, when she prayed, when she went quiet, the younger woman absorbed a living tradition. Because in Apache culture, truth is not taught, it is lived. Another important point, knowledge was not fixed. A ritual could evolve with time as long as its essence remained. This flexibility kept the tradition alive, dynamic, and relevant. Mythology, therefore, never hardened into dogma. It remained a living organism. In the end, for the Apache, spiritual knowledge was not a curriculum. It was a way of being, a path woven through silence, renewed through dreams, and shaped by actions. And perhaps that is why, though it was never written down, it was never forgotten.
What roles did women play in birth, death, and transitional ceremonies? Why were women especially prominent in these moments?
In the Apache belief system, birth, death, and transitional moments were not merely biological events, they were spiritual thresholds. These thresholds were too subtle and intuitive for the average person to perceive clearly, which is why women, especially elder women, played a direct and essential role during these times. The moment of birth was considered a soul's passage. A new being did not enter this world solely with their body, but also with the spirit they carried. For this reason, births were attended not only by midwives or assisting women, but sometimes also by a female shaman. However, this shaman rarely intervened directly. She would often sit quietly in the corner of the tent, sensing the direction of the wind, the mother's breath, and the rhythm of the child's arrival. During this process, women were responsible for maintaining the mother's spiritual balance, because it was believed that if the mother felt fear, the child might be born with only a partial soul. Women also took center stage in the post-birth rituals. The baby's first bath, first touch, and first prayers were all performed by female hands. These prayers were usually done in silence, expressed through breath and gentle gestures, because the newborn spirit didn't yet understand the language of the world, but could recognize the rhythm of the heart and the intent behind a touch. Death, like birth, was considered a transition, but this time the soul had to be held in balance as it departed. Women would sit vigil at the side of the dying person through the night, quietly recounting their life or softly singing an old song into their ear. These songs weren't meant to ease the fear of death, but to prepare the soul for its new journey. In Apache belief, death was not a loss, but a voyage. And it was once again women who guided the spirit. In transitional ceremonies, such as coming of age, marriage, first hunt, or first vision, women always played a guiding role. Especially in the ceremonies marking a girl's first menstrual cycle, the process was considered both a physical and spiritual transformation, and was entirely orchestrated by women. During this sacred rite, the young girl would be aligned with the rhythm of the moon by her grandmothers and mothers, and would perform her first dance of union with nature. In these ceremonies, women were not the ones speaking aloud, but the ones carrying the meaning. A glance, a gesture, a posture, each was symbolic and conveyed a spiritual message to the observers. Because in Apache culture, true knowledge is not shouted. It is hidden in the posture of the body. In conclusion, whether it was greeting a soul at birth, sending it off at death, or guiding it through life's transitions, the guardian was most often a woman. She might be a shaman or simply a mother, but she was always the keeper of the soul's gateways.
How is the mother figure represented in Apache mythology as a carrier of the soul? Is she just a biological mother, or does she hold a deeper meaning?
In Apache mythology, the mother is far more than a woman who gives birth. She is a vessel deeply connected to the essence of life itself. This figure might be an actual woman, a spirit, or even nature itself, because to the Apache, a mother is not just a giver of body, but a bearer of soul, a keeper of spiritual continuity, and a guide in the journey between worlds. There are no fixed deities like Great Mother or First Woman frequently recurring in their myths. Instead, stories often feature feminine presences that are integrated with nature, beings that resemble humans yet remain intangible. For instance, in some tales, there's the Mother of the Wind, a presence that visits children in dreams, whispering direction for their futures. This figure is never clearly defined. She is a shadow, a sound, a scent. But most of all, she is intuition. According to Apache beliefs, before a child is conceived, a feminine spiritual force chooses the soul. This spirit mother then signals the right time to the earthly mother. This suggests that birth is not merely a biological process, but part of a cosmic alignment. Thus, the mother exists in two dimensions, one who gives physical birth and another who calls the spirit forth. Dreams play a vital role in expressing this archetype. Many young women have symbolic dreams before conceiving. They may speak with a deer, a river, or a bird. These are not random. They are signs that the spirit of motherhood is awakening within them. Because in Apache culture, motherhood begins not when the womb is ready, but when the soul is prepared. On a mythic level, the mother figure is fused with nature. The earth, the moon, the water, and the wind all carry feminine consciousness. This is why rituals often include kissing the ground, kneeling under moonlight, or whispering to the wind. There are no statues of a goddess, but the spirit of motherhood is present in every natural element. When a child cries, it isn't just the biological mother who listens. Elder women nearby feel the cry too, because in Apache belief, every woman is potentially a soul carrier. Whether she births a child or not, her voice, her touch, her silence, each can guide a spirit. In the end, the mother in Apache mythology is not a single person, but a consciousness. She exists everywhere and lives through everything. As a bearer of the soul, woman is not only the mother of bodies, but of silence, of dreams, and of the land itself. And that is why true power is never displayed. It is carried quietly in the shadows.
What happened when an Apache died? Where did the soul go? And why was speaking of the dead considered taboo? In the next episode, we'll explore the Apache understanding of life after death, the journey of lost spirits, and the invisible boundary between the living and the dead. Stay with us, because some stories are not written on tombstones, they're carried on the wind.